Join Angie Taylor, a 30-year veteran educator and co-founder of Valor Global Online and Valor Global Foundation, if you long to leave a legacy for your family and leave your mark on the world. This show is for you. This is The Way of Valor.
Hey, welcome to The Way of Valor. I am your host, Angie Taylor, and it is good to be with you guys today. I have today's guest with me, Cole James. He is part of the Grief Recovery Method group, and we're going to talk today very specifically about grief recovery, his journey in this process. He has a fascinating story, but I think this message today is going to help you as a parent as well as personally navigate the storms of life that we all encounter. So Cole, welcome to The Way of Valor. I'm so glad you're on our show today.
Thank you for having me, Angie. I'm really excited to be here.
So Cole, you have a really interesting story, just how you even got to be involved in this organization. So let's maybe back up and share a little bit about your origin story as an organization.
Sure. So I am the president of the Grief Recovery Institute, and this was an organization that my father created over 40 years ago. Unfortunately, it was created due to a loss. He lost a son, an infant son, and he was obviously devastated. His wife was devastated, and at the time, loved ones, friends, family around him, really everyone. Kind of their best plan was, let's pretend that this didn't happen. Let's remind you that you should be grateful that you're young. You can have other kids. Let's repaint the nursery and just let's start over, right? And unfortunately, that really didn't work for him and his wife. And unfortunately, shortly after that, they were divorced. And ultimately, it led to him contemplating suicide. I'm so grateful he didn't take his life. He had one kind of thought that popped into his mind when contemplating that, and that was why was this loss so much more devastating than all of the trauma and grief that he had serving as a combat Marine in Vietnam, growing up in an alcoholic home. I mean, his tank was full long before this loss, but this loss really brought him to his knees. And he wanted to solve that question. Why does this loss feel so different than the other ones? He went and looked everywhere he could. He researched, back then we didn't have the internet, right? So it's like he actually was in the library a lot, and he found a bunch of stuff that was helpful for him to help him to start to grieve and complete what was emotionally unfinished from that loss. He was a home builder. He was a contractor. He had no background in this. So this was purely to help him with his heart. And what happened was friends and family started sending him other people who had significant losses, and they started talking to him, and he started sharing things that were helpful for him. From that, he self-published a book called the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's a purple book. Some of your listeners may recognize it. And that Grief Recovery Handbook became an action plan for people to discover what's unfinished in their lives and work through it to complete what's emotionally unfinished. We're really proud of the fact that the book is in 26 languages now. When he first started this, he thought this was just a Western English speaking problem. He just figured everyone else knew how to process grief just fine. The fact of the matter is, though, we can go to really any continent on Earth and really talk about the feelings of unresolved grief, and people will be listening and want to apply this work. So that's really cool. Anyway, where I came into the story was I just grew up, and if you ask me at 6 years old, what does your dad do? I would say he helps sad people. That was my frame of reference of what he did, right? People came over to the house. He talked to them on the couch or at the kitchen table. They seemed very sad. And months later, there was kind of a light bulb. There was a light back in their eye. They were, they just were different. And so I rooted him on, right? I pursued baseball and athletics. And then from there, I got a job in the entertainment industry. And so in my early 20s, I was doing something completely different, a whole different career path. And again, just rooting my dad on from the sidelines. Unfortunately, I lost a cousin to suicide. I lost a best friend to a drunk driving accident. I had some really, heartbreaking romantic relationships with girls, breakups, all trying to navigate that in my 20s. And I was struggling, and I just kind of one day I said, Dad, would it be weird if I went to one of your, seminars? And he was like, I think he was trying to cover the Again, excitement, like you said, isn't the right word, but he was really grateful that I was willing to give it a shot. So anyway, I went to this seminar. There were 12 of us in the room. I did some really important work for me, and I saw the change in the other 12 people. And by midway through that weekend, I was really contemplating dedicating my life to this work because I saw my dad getting older, his business partner was getting older. I didn't see who was going to carry the torch in this work, and it was meanwhile, very organically working for me. And again, by the end of that 4 days, I was asking my dad for a job. I was putting my 2-week notice in at a large corporation. They thought I was insane. They're like, "What are you doing? You're going to go work with grieving people day in, day out." But they didn't understand this was about grief recovery, right? I want your listeners to understand that, like, the word recovery is in our title. If this was just about talking about grief and how sad people feel and offering no tools to help them, I would have washed out in another 2 weeks, right? I would have put in my 2 weeks, went there for 2 weeks and left. But I've been doing this work for 15 years now because I love helping people navigate this journey and seeing the culmination of this work, which amounts to them getting to process stuff maybe they've been holding on to for 20, 30 years, just because no one showed them some of these tools, right? We look at a lot of the world's problems from a different lens than a lot of other people, right? We see grief everywhere, and we want to help people with that. So anyway, that's kind of how I got into this work. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So many questions pop into mind first and foremost, because obviously you give examples of pretty catastrophic events in one's life, but I suspect, grief is represented in a number of different ways. And so how does somebody know when they're just experiencing a sad event or sadness and when grief recovery is needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that let's start with the definition that we like to use for grief, right? And we say that grief, and we have a couple of definitions, but this is the main one. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So let me just say that one more time. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the change in or end of a familiar pattern of behavior, right? So when we look at grief around change, that really we have seen that grief is about 40 different life events that can produce feelings of unfinished business, unfinished emotional pain. So the obvious one, right, that we're all going to go to immediately is death, right? Death of a loved one, death of a less than loved one. But then if we continue that out, it can be about moving. Right, I moved from Oregon to Idaho to the home of our dreams. Me and my wife and our 4 children. We always wanted a little homestead. And so literally we got to move to the house of our dreams, right? When people come visit, they're like, "Cole, Ashley, this is exactly what you guys have been talking about for 10 years, right? We're so happy for you." But there's still a ton of grief because we left, right? So anyway, I know we don't have time for this, but it's like loss of health, right? Change in health, divorce, romantic relationships that end in a breakup that didn't, start in a marriage, career change, retirement, COVID, right? COVID was a massive grief event for all of us, right? And I'm not even talking about, unfortunately, those of us who lost loved ones. Look, when somebody says you need to stay in your house for 2 weeks, right, and then that turns into more, and you have to do this and that, that's all a massive change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So when we say grief is happening to different levels, we really do mean on a regular basis, right? To give you an example, like I have a little cousin, and I was visiting her, and she was really sad, and she didn't get the part of Ariel in the Little Mermaid play she was in, right? And no one but us would look at this as a grief event. But I know she had a hope, dream, and expectation she was going to play that role. She showed up for the audition, and then one day her little heart is broken because she didn't get that part, right? Now, if I go work with her in her 20s, is she going to even remember that? Probably not. But like the way we look at that is a little grief in that child, and we need to like help her process that. And that just may hearing about that sadness, right? So anyway, I'm excited to get more into that with you, Angie, because I know a lot of your listeners are families, have kids, and I do too. So anyway, but yeah, so grief is about much more than just death, from what we've seen.
Yeah, that's really good. So let's talk about maybe some key elements of the recovery method. Like why is what you're doing so effective in walking people through their moments of grief.
Yeah, and I would say, let me say this, right? I'm not, I don't hear, I'm not going to say that we're the only thing to do, right? There's other things that can help you with grief. I know a lot of your listeners are Christian. I'm a Christian as well, and so when I go to church, they may be familiar with a program called Grief Share, and that helps a lot of people, and we can kind of discuss, differences between that program and our program. But what our program is known for is we really help people identify all of the things that are unfinished in the specific relationship of who they're grieving. So I'll give you an example. I lost my dad, unfortunately, 3 years ago to cancer, right? I was there all along the way with my mother and my sister. It was the most painful experience I've ever had, is watching this amazing man, my hero, die of cancer, and I try and help him through that. A lot of people would be stuck and focused on the ending or the events around it, or they may look at one or two different fights in the relationship. And it's very hard to get complete with the dad that I knew for 43 years in modern society, where they don't really help you specifically look what is unfinished. So in our work, we do very practical, very simple tools that are highly effective because it's thorough. So we do a thing called a relationship graph. So I'm going to chart from my dawn of conscious memory, the very first memory I have of my father. I'm going to chart that all the way up until the day he died, and I'm going to find all the good and all the bad, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that I never processed through my life, right? And I'm going to go one by one, get complete with all of those events. And so when I do that, I'm going to look back at the relationship, and I'm going to have a lot different feeling than if I never looked at that stuff and never completed what was unfinished, the things that were churning inside of me. So one thing we say is, like, for the younger listeners, I'm sorry, but there used to be these things called record players, right? And records would spin and there'd be a needle. And what we kind of describe unresolved grief as is the needle fell off and we're on a loop, right? And we keep reliving this hurt and this pain, and we don't know how to put that needle back on and get the song singing again. And that's unresolved grief, right? And so I don't want to live with all that churning emotion around my dad, right? Because he's going to come into my heart all the time. Right, my son hits a really cool home run in Little League, right? And my first, and this is a true story, like this happened a year ago. He hits a home run, and my first thought was, oh, I wish my dad was right here in the stands to see this, and so he could give his grandson a hug. What do I do with that feeling? Most people just stuff that down and keep moving forward, right? Luckily, there are other tools that we can do to get complete. So that if that event happens and my son hits that home run, there may be a twinge of sadness there, but it's not this unresolved thing that's painful, right? And it's kind of a feeling thing. Like, you kind of have to go through it to feel the difference. But now, if my son does something cool, it's like, oh, I miss you, I love you, that would have been cool if you were here. And I just got to let go of that twinge of pain because I don't want to hold that. But it's hard to do. So anyway. Again, I got to be careful because I do usually 4-day trainings, and I can talk forever. But essentially, our method, the bread and butter of what we do, is it's an action-based, step-by-step approach to being very thorough on one relationship at a time. Because grief can be overwhelming, and in your life or my life, we may have 10, 20, 30 events that are grief events in our life. So we help people focus on one at a time and help them work through it very thoroughly on that. Where other programs I have seen, it's kind of like a check-in style group every week or that, but it's not, let's really discover what feels unfinished in that marriage or that
That's
divorce,
good.
or what feels really unfinished with the dad that you wish desperately would have been a different dad, but he wasn't, those kind of things. So we just honor the uniqueness of every relationship on the planet. There's no two relationships that are same. So we try and help our clients really find what's true for them.
That's really good. It seems like there's this sense of closing the feedback loops that keep spiraling if we don't bring
Perfectly
some reconciliation.
Totally.
I'm curious, I really love and do find what you're saying so important. As somebody who works with kids all this time, I often see parents that have their own unresolved wounds. They're almost trying to heal themselves through their kids, but re-inflicting pain on their kids unknowingly. And so how do you help someone, even recognize their need for what you have to offer here, because I can see that sometimes, especially when you've navigated something, you don't even recognize, man, I probably need some more help.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I have to be. You just help me stay on track because I may flow a couple of places, but so I have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old, three boys and a girl. And number one, I'm so grateful that I understood that whether you classify your relationship with your mom and dad as good, bad, or indifferent, you have unresolved grief from the past with your parents. Okay. And my advice would be to go get complete with those things so you do not bring them into this, relationship with your child, right? When we say, wow, I just sounded just like my dad there. Well, obviously, like some of that stuff may be good, but a lot of the time that stuff you didn't want, right? And it's like that's happening because we're incomplete with the past, right? Things in our belief system that aren't ours, we're carrying forward because they were put in way, way back. So as parents, I am always guiding people to do the grief recovery method work on their relationships with mom and dad, like number one. And a lot of the time, parents are motivated to help their kids. So even if they don't feel like they have any grief, they will go try stuff to help be better parents so it's a great entry point into this method. Like, so what I'm saying is you don't need to have something that you would qualify as grief right this minute to start this program and really seek the benefits of this program. So, same with my marriage. I had to go and get emotionally complete with my high school sweetheart. Otherwise, I was going to bring in a bunch of stuff that is inaccurate or hopes, dreams, and expectations what my marriage with my current wife is, right? So if I don't go and say goodbye to different things there, or I'm in big trouble because, again, I'm bringing that into my current marriage. And again, if we're incomplete with our childhood, we're bringing a lot of that into our parenting, whether we like it or not, or if we're aware of it or not, right? And so I didn't start there, though, right? I started with grief recovery because my friend killed himself and I was heartbroken over there. It wasn't until I started doing more relationship graphs and more actions around other losses that I really saw, oh yeah, I do have a lot of unresolved stuff and I got to complete that, or it controls me, right? And so that would be my first. And just to let your audience know, there is a program we offer called Helping Children with Loss, and it's a great entry point. It's a group program. A lot of school districts and a lot of school curriculums now are starting to implement it, and so you're not doing your own personal work. You are learning how to help kids, how to have conversations if grandma dies, or if a lot of the time loss of a pet is a first one for a child a lot of the time. And a lot of the time we really handle that not well as parents, right? The obvious one is let's go get a new dog on Saturday and just let's try and short circuit the pain and pretend like we can shield our kids from pain instead of letting them truly feel that and complete that relationship so we can actually have a new relationship with a new pet and not try and replace it. That's the one I see mostly. And then again, I like to think of myself as a pretty masculine leader of my household and strong guy. But I'll tell you what, when my dad was dying and I had feelings about it and there were tears, I was going to let that be okay. I wanted my sons to see me cry. I wanted them to see that when I had emotional pain, it's normal and natural as laughter. And so I want them to have that I want my sons and my daughter, I want them to be able to have all of those feelings on the spectrum, right? And so I just try and lead by example. But before grief recovery, I couldn't cry in front of my wife and my girlfriend at the time. I couldn't cry in front of other people. I was not capable of it. So I didn't have that skill. So I had to go do work to get, I don't want to say skill, but to have that ability to role model what I think is healthy for kids to see, during
That
sad
is,
events.
yeah, you know what? That is so helpful because as parents, of course, we don't want our kids to hurt. And so we inadvertently are often short circuiting their own grief recovery process in our need to make you feel okay and better about a situation. And I think often what I've seen, and I think you can speak to this, is, when kids are wounded or hurt or feel bad, they often don't tell their parents about it and
Yep.
keep it quiet. So Why do you think that is? And how do you think we do a better job of opening up those pieces of communication?
Yeah. So I think that I want to say that they stopped going to their parents at a certain age or at a certain time. I think they actually, if we really pay attention as parents, I think, and we look back, I think they did come to us initially. But when the conversation always turns into don't feel bad, look on the bright side, don't feel bad, it could have been better, be grateful for what you have. And again, a lot of those conversations do need to take place, don't get me wrong. But when the child is emotionally in pain, we can't fix it, and we can't make it feel better until we hear them and let them have sadness and express themselves. And a lot of the time we want to go right past that. Don't right. There was a study years ago, and by the time we're 15, we've had 22,000 communications from authority figures in our life to not feel sad or sad or painful. If you're going to cry, go to your room. All of those things. So I think what happens is they actually go, what's the use of going to mom or dad? They're not hearing me right now. They're going to tell, again, here they are. And there's this whole chasm that is grief or sadness or pain from whatever the event just happened. And we keep trying to trampoline them over to the other side immediately because we love them, right? I'm not trying to say anything bad about anyone listening. I do this too, but we're trying to do something that is impossible, right? We can't shield them and hide them and divert them from pain. To give you an example, some close friends of mine, the kid's goldfish died, right? And instead of just saying the goldfish died, or even better yet, having the child help remove the little body of the goldfish and say goodbye, they hide it. Then they come up with this story how it jumped out of the window like Nemo and it's off flowing in the sea, right? And it's like, number one, kids are very intuitive. So they're already reading your body language, and something you are doing is coming off as not truthful, right? Whether we think we're very slick as big people, but we forget that these little people are actually very intuitive, very much in contact with their spirit and their soul, and they're recording and watching us, right? As what does this big person do? So if my dad was dying and every time I got a feeling, I ran to the room and closed the door, what do you think my sons are going to do the first time they have their serious grief event, right? So it's like if we don't have the capability to role model, we're in big trouble. So I would just say if you can get some more skills and be okay with conversations around emotions and let them feel sadness without any thought that you need to fix system for them, they will come back to you. My 12-year-old son has no problem talking to me about his emotions because luckily, thank God, I had some tools and I knew what to do. So I've made it safe for him to have conversations. Now, not always. So a lot of the time he'll prefer going to mom instead of me, and that's cool too. But I've worked as hard as I could as a dad, being able to give them the message like constantly. Sad things happen in life, and we can feel sad, and then we can figure out how to work through that. But so much of society, we talked about this, kind of earlier, Angie. So much of society is about finding distractions from sadness, right? It's why we struggle with food. It's why we struggle with drugs. It's why we struggle with violence, right? I mean, the list goes on. But in our perspective, we call those things short-term energy relieving behaviors, right? So it's like the kids were mean to me at school. They come home and grandma gives them a cookie, right? You'll feel better. That we train people. If you're in emotional turmoil, immediately seek out a distraction, right? And so that's what we're up against, right? Is those kind of things. And again, I more than anyone I know, I don't want my kids to have pain. I don't want them to have sadness.
Right.
But it's just not
Yeah.
realistic, right?
Well, and I do think there's this piece that, I mean, honestly, life is full of joy and sadness, right?
Yep.
And pushing through the mundane and the excite, life is a full on roller coaster. And I think we are trained ourselves and train our kids that if bad things are happening, sad things are happening, man, life is going off the rails for you versus this is kind of just the way life works.
Yep. Yeah, this is part of the experience. No, I totally agree. And a lot of the time people that we do these seminars in hotels across the country, and so often people are shocked because it says the grief recovery method on the door, but there's like a ton of laughter coming out of the room. And so constantly hotel staff is like, there's way more laughter than I figured you guys would have. And I love that because that's real life. And then don't be scared, but there's also boxes of tissues in the room, and there's plenty of tears happening as well, right? And like you said, that to me is real life. That's really what God designed us to. We came into this world equipped for these emotions, right? So clearly God wanted us to have them. And so why do we suppress or try to hide the sad one at all costs, right? And so yeah, it's really but I totally agree with you, right? This is life, and instead of trying to short circuit or distract from the pain, let's just walk through it. It's not easy, but it's certainly, because what happens for us, what I see a lot when people have unresolved grief, it robs you of future choice, right? So let's say you're coming out of a really bad divorce. Well, right, we're living guarded. We now have our body armor on. We don't want to expose our heart to that again, right? And so that is life limiting. Or, again, the way dad raised us, which is like, hey, you don't ever show any sadness, or that's weakness and that's pain, right? Now we're kind of a shell of our capability, and that's life limiting, right? And so there is a lot of grief eats us up. I don't know how else to say it. It is life limiting, and it's very rarely given the credit it's due, because we think that grief work should only be done 3 months after the death of someone, or four. Like I wish more people would understand that you don't have to be acutely grieving a loss of some certain time frame to look at stuff from your past, because chances are you are carrying it around with you, and it's heavy.
That's very, very good. Man, this has been so good. I would love to make sure our audience knows how to find you, what resources you guys have available for them. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So the start point that would be great is you could either visit our site, griefrecoverymethod.com. Another thing you could do is, if you just want to get into the work, you can get the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's on Amazon. It's on anywhere you find a book. It's a purple book. It'll say the Grief Recovery Handbook. There are actions in there. We also train thousands of people all over the country that you can work with, that hold groups or work with people one-on-one. A lot of churches offer this work as well. And so, any of those would be great things. And then parents, again, if you go to our website and search our programs, you can find Helping Children with Loss groups going on if you want to learn more about tools to help your children. So we really try and have a lot of different programs depending on what you're going through or what you want to work on.
That's so good. So in our final thought, I would love for you to just share, why is this so important for every person listening to grab a hold of this for their own life?
Yes, I think this is so important because the truth of the matter is we all have a lot of unresolved grief in our pasts, and it is affecting our current relationships. It's affecting our capacity to love, to be free, to have joy. And I just know, for me and thousands of other people I've seen, this really helps you in every aspect of your life. I've seen people who have had massive loss in faith, loss of their faith, come back to that. I think that's another thing that, maybe at another time, Angie, we can talk about. But yes. I think that specifically when people go back to the church community for comfort following a loss, but we don't know what to say, we don't know what to deliver. Maybe we offer scripture too soon, or the wrong scripture at the wrong time. A lot of the time we're losing people that are not coming back to the church because they expected comfort after a grief event and they didn't receive it, or they didn't feel heard and they never return to church again. It's not what I want, but I see it happening time and time again. And so there's spiritual work following a loss. There's definitely spiritual work to be done, no doubt about it. But then there's this other large aspect, which is the emotional work, and that's really what the grief recovery method helps people with, is that. So again, I would just read our stuff if it makes sense. we'd love to talk to you. And if
Awesome.
not, that's okay too. Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I would definitely recommend every person. I know I'm going to jump on and get it for myself and our community, but Cole, we appreciate your willingness to share with us. And I think it is an important resource for all of our families to get a hold of. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for everything you do, Angie. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Hey, folks, if you've enjoyed this podcast or you know somebody that would benefit from hearing, please go ahead and share it out with your community. Give us a 5-star review. This helps the algorithm and helps get these resources in the hands of people that need them most. Blessings on your day, and thanks for listening.